He was not sitting on that roof because he was lost. He was sitting there because someone beneath it was still alive. The rain had been falling over Briar Glen, Virginia, since just after midnight, a hard spring rain that turned the streets silver and filled the gutters with leaves, grit, and the smell of soaked pine. By dawn, the old Miller house at the end of Hawthorne Road looked less like a home and more like something the storm had tried to erase. Half the porch had folded in. The upper roof had sagged into the attic. Window glass glittered in the wet grass like frost. Neighbors stood behind the yellow tape in coats and bathrobes, whispering the way people whisper when a place they know suddenly becomes unfamiliar. Firefighters moved carefully through the yard, their boots sinking into mud, their radios crackling under the low growl of thunder. No flames, no shouting, just the steady, terrible sound of water dripping through broken wood. Staff Sergeant Ryan Carter stepped out of his pickup and stopped cold. He had driven back from Quantico only 2 hours earlier, still wearing his olive field jacket over a faded Marine Corps t-shirt, his duffel bag unopened in the passenger seat. 37 years old, fair-skinned, tall, and broad through the shoulders, Ryan carried himself with the quiet discipline of a man who had learned to notice small things before they became disasters. His sandy brown hair was cut short, touched with rain the moment he stepped into the street. A pale scar crossed the bridge of his nose, almost invisible unless the light caught it. His blue-gray eyes moved over the house, over the responders, over the crushed porch beam leaning at a wrong angle. Then they lifted, and there, above the caved-in second story, sitting on a narrow stretch of collapsed roof as if guarding a border no one else could see, was a German shepherd. The dog was motionless, sable coat darkened by rain, ears forward, chest rising and falling. Mud streaked along his legs. A torn red working collar clung around his neck, the faded letters K9 barely visible beneath the water. He did not bark at the crowd. He did not run when a firefighter called to him. He only stared down through a broken seam in the roof, eyes fixed on the darkness below. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that posture. He had seen it in training yards, in airport hangars, on long roads overseas where a dog's silence could mean more than any alarm. That was not fear. That was focus. A young firefighter glanced at Ryan as he approached the tape. "Sir, please stay back." Ryan lifted both hands, calm and open. "I'm not here to get in your way." His voice was low, steady, softened by the rain. "That dog is signaling." The firefighter looked up, then back at him. "We tried coaxing him down. He won't move." "Because he is not done yet," Ryan said. On the roof, the shepherd shifted his weight. A board gave a soft groan beneath him. The crowd drew in one breath together. Ryan heard it, that thin human sound of fear passing from person to person. But the dog did not flinch. He leaned forward, nose low, then pressed one paw against the cracked shingles as though pointing to a place no one had chosen to trust. Ryan stepped closer to the tape. Rain slid from his jaw. Somewhere behind him, an older woman murmured a prayer. The house belonged to the Millers, everyone said, but the details came broken and scattered. The parents had left before dawn to check on a flooded road. Their teenage daughter, Emily, was believed to be staying with a friend. The house was supposed to be empty. Supposed to be. Ryan had learned long ago that those two words could cost lives. He looked again at the German shepherd. The dog's amber eyes met his for one brief second across the rain. Not pleading, not panicked, commanding, as if he had been waiting for the one person who would understand that loyalty does not leave its post just because the world below it has fallen apart. Ryan ducked under the tape before anyone could stop him. "Sergeant," someone called, though nobody there had asked his rank. Maybe they saw it in the way he moved. Maybe grief and duty both leave the same shape on a man. A fire captain stepped into his path, square-jawed, soaked through, his helmet dripping. "You cannot go in there. Roof is unstable. We already cleared the main floor from the outside." Ryan kept his eyes on the dog. "Did you clear the attic crawl space?" The captain hesitated. It was less than a second, but Ryan caught it. Above them, the K9 lowered his head toward the broken seam and let out one sound. Not a bark, not a whine. A deep, rough breath that carried through the rain like a warning from the house itself. Everyone went still. Even the radios seemed to fade. Ryan's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "There is someone inside." The captain turned slowly toward the roof, and for the first time, He did not look at the dog as a problem to solve. He looked at him as a witness. Ryan took one step forward, mud pulling at his boots, his heart beating with that old, familiar rhythm that came before every impossible choice. The shepherd stood on the broken roof, rain running down his muzzle, refusing to abandon the darkness beneath him. And in that moment, Ryan Carter understood something with a certainty deeper than training. The rescue had not begun when he arrived. It had begun when the K-9 chose to stay. The fire captain's name was Daniel Briggs, a man in his early 50s with rain silvering the edges of his mustache and the tired eyes of someone who had carried too many strangers out of ruined places. He did not like civilians near a compromised structure. He liked former Marines near it even less, because they tended to walk toward danger with the calm of men stepping into church. But he had seen the dog's signal. He had seen the way the shepherd's whole body pointed to the broken seam in the roof. That kind of focus was not confusion. It was information. "We checked the downstairs from the front," Briggs said, his voice low enough that only Ryan could hear. "The staircase is blocked. Back wall shifted about 6 inches. We cannot put weight inside until the engineer clears it." Ryan nodded once, never taking his eyes off the K-9. "Then do not put weight inside. Put eyes where the dog is looking." Briggs turned to a younger firefighter. "Get the thermal camera, and bring the ladder truck around the west side. Slow." The young man ran, boots splashing through the grass. The crowd behind the tape grew quieter. Their whispers thinned into the kind of silence that comes when hope arrives before proof. Ryan stood at the edge of the yard, rain running down his sleeves, watching the shepherd on the roof. The dog had not changed position except for one paw, which remained pressed against the shingles near a split in the roofline. His breathing was steady, but his muscles trembled from cold and strain. Ryan could tell he had been there for a while, maybe since before sunrise, maybe since the first deep crack of the house giving way. "Does anyone know his name?" Ryan asked. A woman in a blue raincoat stepped forward from behind the tape, one hand at her mouth. "Atlas," she said. "That is Atlas. He belongs to the Millers. He was trained as a search dog before they adopted him. Their son was a handler." Ryan turned slightly. "Their son?" The woman nodded, eyes shining. "Caleb Miller. He passed away last year after a medical emergency. Atlas came home with the family after that. That dog barely leaves Emily's side." The name settled over the yard like another drop in the storm. Emily. Supposed to be at a friend's house. Supposed to be safe. Supposed to be anywhere but beneath that broken roof. Ryan looked back up. Atlas was staring into the gap again, ears angled forward, listening to something no one else could hear. The thermal camera arrived in a hard plastic case, beaded with rain. Briggs took it, stepped carefully around the porch debris, and aimed toward the upper half of the house from the safest angle he could find. The screen glowed in his hands, blurred by water and distance. Shapes appeared in cold blues and muddy oranges. Broken beams, wet insulation, pockets of trapped air. Nothing clear. Briggs wiped the lens with his sleeve and adjusted. Atlas suddenly stood. The roof groaned beneath him, and every responder in the yard froze. "Easy," Ryan whispered, though the dog was too far to hear him. Or maybe he was not. Atlas turned his head toward Ryan, and for one strange second, the rain seemed to pause between them. Ryan lifted his right hand, palm out, the way he would calm a working dog at a gate. "Stay." Atlas held still. His ears twitched. His eyes remained locked on Ryan's hand. "Hey." Trained dog. A grieving dog. A loyal dog standing on a failing roof because love had given him one last assignment. Briggs glanced at Ryan. "You know dogs?" Ryan gave a small, tired breath that was not quite a laugh. "One saved me once." He did not explain. There was no time, and some memories were not meant to be opened in the rain. The ladder truck backed into position with a deep mechanical hum. Its outriggers lowered onto the street, pressing into wet asphalt. A firefighter climbed into the bucket with a safety line, while another handed up a collapsible rescue sling. The plan was simple in words and difficult in truth. Reach Atlas. Secure him. Remove him from the roof before the storm took the decision away from them. But Atlas saw the bucket rise and lowered his head, almost refusing. He stepped closer to the gap, not away from danger, toward it. "He will not leave," Ryan said. Briggs tightened his jaw. "Then we make him leave." Ryan shook his head. "No. You force him. He fights the sling, the roof shifts, and everyone loses time." Briggs looked at him, rain dripping from the brim of his helmet. Then what do you suggest? Ryan stared up at the shepherd. He could feel the answer forming before he wanted to say it. I go up first. Absolutely not. He responded to my hand signal. That does not make you authorized. No, Ryan said softly. It makes me useful. Another low crack rolled through the house. Not loud, not dramatic, just a tired wooden sigh from deep inside the structure. The sound traveled into the yard and emptied every face of color. Atlas lowered his nose to the seam and gave one sharp bark. Then another. 2 clean signals, spaced evenly, trained and deliberate. Briggs looked at the thermal screen again. This time, near the upper corner beneath the collapsed roof, a faint warmth flickered. Small, unsteady, almost hidden behind the cold lines of rain-soaked debris. The captain's face changed. Not fear. Recognition. I have a heat signature, he said. The words moved through the responders without anyone repeating them. Ryan felt them enter his chest and strike there. Beneath the roof, behind wet beams and broken ceiling, someone was alive. Atlas had known. Atlas had stayed. The bucket lifted higher into the gray morning, creaking softly as it moved toward the edge of the collapsed roof. Ryan stepped into a harness, hands steady, heart not. Briggs fastened the front buckle himself, then looked him in the eye. You listen to my people. One wrong shift, we pull you out. Ryan nodded. Above them, Atlas watched the bucket approach, rain shining along his sable coat. He looked exhausted now, but not defeated. Never defeated. Ryan rose slowly over the yard, past the broken porch, past the second-story window with curtains breathing in the wind. The closer he got, the stronger the smell became. Wet wood, old plaster, gasoline from the fire truck, rain on dust, and beneath it, faint as a memory, the living scent of a home that had not given up. When the bucket reached the roofline, Ryan crouched low and extended his hand. Atlas took one step toward him, then stopped and looked back at the dark opening. Ryan understood. I know, he whispered. You found her. Atlas's ears moved at the word. Her. The dog looked straight into Ryan's eyes, and a small sound broke from his throat, almost too soft for the storm to carry. Not a cry, not a warning, a plea. Ryan reached for the torn red collar, fingers closing gently around it. All right, buddy, he said. Show me where. Ryan kept one hand on Atlas's collar and the other pressed flat against the wet shingles, feeling the roof breathe under his weight. It was not steady ground. It shifted in tiny ways, almost too small to see, the way an old dock moves beneath your boots when the tide is restless. The bucket hovered beside him, close enough to retreat, far enough to make every inch matter. Below, Captain Briggs raised one arm, signaling for stillness. The rain softened for a moment, not stopping, only thinning into a cold mist that hung over the yard and turned every face behind the tape pale and watchful. Atlas lowered himself carefully, belly nearly touching the roof, and crawled toward the broken seam. Ryan followed as far as the safety line allowed. Slow, Briggs called from below. No sudden wait. Ryan answered with a nod, though his eyes never left the dog. Atlas reached the opening and pushed his nose into the dark. He inhaled once, twice. Then he looked back at Ryan and tapped his paw against the shingles. 3 times. Not random. Not panic. A pattern. Ryan felt a chill that had nothing to do with rain. Somewhere in Atlas's training, someone had taught him how to speak when words were impossible. 3 taps. Ryan said into the radio clipped to his harness. He is marking directly below this seam. Briggs's voice came back rough through the static. Thermal confirms warmth beneath the upper crawl space. We are bringing in a listening device. Ryan looked down into the opening. At first there was only darkness, wet insulation, and the angled shadow of a beam. Then, from somewhere below, he heard it. Faint, thin, not even a full sound. More like breath catching on the edge of a word. Atlas heard it too. His whole body changed. His ears lifted. His tail went still. A low whine rose in his chest, the kind of sound that does not ask for comfort but demands action. Ryan leaned closer, careful not to load weight onto the cracked section. Emily, he called, keeping his voice calm. Emily Miller, my name is Ryan Carter. I am with the rescue team. If you can hear me, make any sound you can. For 2 seconds, the world held its breath. Rain tapped the roof. Water dripped inside the walls. A radio hissed below. Then came a tiny knock from beneath the debris. Once. Then once again. The crowd gasped, and someone began to cry softly behind the tape. Ryan closed his eyes for half a heartbeat. Not relief. Not yet. But the door had opened. Life had answered. "We hear you," he said, his voice steady though his throat tightened. "You are not alone." Atlas pressed his muzzle to the gap and gave a soft huff. Almost gentle, almost like he was trying to send warmth through the broken house. Ryan could see why Emily had stayed close to this dog. There was something in him that made fear feel less powerful. The listening device arrived, long and slender, handed up through the bucket by a firefighter named Morris. He was young, barely old enough to have lost the nervous energy in his hands, but his eyes sharpened when Ryan took the equipment. "We have got you anchored," Morris said. "Captain says you have 2 minutes at that edge." "Then we make them count," Ryan replied. He slid the small microphone probe toward the seam, guiding it past a curl of wet tar paper and a splintered strip of plywood. Atlas watched every movement, not interfering, not blinking. The speaker crackled. At first there was static, the wet murmur of the house, the distant creak of wood. Then a girl's voice surfaced, fragile and muffled. "Atlas." The single word changed everything. The dog stood too fast, and the roof gave a warning pop beneath his back paws. Ryan caught the collar instantly, not pulling, just holding him steady. "Easy, buddy. She is there. We know." Atlas trembled with the effort to obey. His eyes stayed fixed on the hole. The voice came again, weaker. "I cannot move." Briggs heard it over the radio, and his command tone shifted into something deeper, gentler. "Emily, this is Captain Briggs with Briar Glen Fire and Rescue. We are coming to you. Stay as still as you can. Can you tell us where you are?" A pause. A small breath. "Attic room." I went back for Atlas. Then the ceiling dropped. Ryan looked at the dog. Rain ran down Atlas's face like tears, though his eyes were clear, fierce, unbroken. He had not abandoned her, because she had come back for him. 2 souls, each refusing to save themselves first. "Emily," Ryan said, leaning toward the microphone. "Atlas is right here with me. He stayed on the roof until we found you." The silence that followed was full, trembling, alive. Then Emily whispered, "Good boy." Atlas heard it through the speaker. He lowered his head and closed his eyes for one brief second, as if those 2 words had carried him farther than strength ever could. Below, Briggs was already moving people into position. The rescue plan changed in the space of a minute. The front staircase remained blocked, but the west wall near the attic had a narrow void where the roof had folded instead of fully collapsing. They would brace the lower frame, cut a small access path from the outside, and use the thermal image and Atlas's mark to guide the team. No rushing. No heroics for show. Just patient hands, measured inches, and faith held quiet under the rain. Ryan stayed on the roof with Atlas while the first supports went in below. Every sound seemed larger now. The buzz of the saw against siding. The thud of stabilizing beams set into place. The metallic click of carabiners. Emily's breathing through the speaker, soft but present. Atlas listened to it all like music only he understood. Once, when the saw began near the wrong section, he stiffened and barked sharply. Ryan relayed it, and Briggs adjusted the cut 6 inches to the left. Behind the wall, the thermal signal grew clearer. A small pocket. A living space inside a broken home. Ryan looked at Atlas and felt all move through him, quiet and heavy. The dog was not just waiting to be rescued. He was leading the rescue. A gust of wind swept over the roof, carrying the smell of wet cedar and mud from the yard. Atlas leaned against Ryan's knee, not from weakness alone, but from trust. Ryan rested his palm between the dog's ears. "You did your job," he whispered. "Now let us do ours." Then, from below the broken seam, Emily's voice came once more, thin but certain. "Please do not take him away." Ryan looked at the dark opening, then at the shepherd beside him, standing guard on the edge of ruin. "No one is taking him away," he said. "He is staying until you come out." The latter leaned carefully against the roofline, its metal feet sinking slightly into the sodden ground, carrying with it the weight of every careful decision made in the last hour. Ryan Carter secured the harness, double-checking the clips, feeling the rain run cold down his forearms. Atlas stood rigid, head low, tail still, but the faintest whine escaped him, a soft vibration of anticipation that the dog directed at Ryan and only Ryan. The air smelled of wet cedar and rain-soaked pine needles, the kind that carries memory and warning in equal measure. Ryan shifted slowly, keeping one hand on the harness tether while reaching for the edge of the roof with the other. Each step was measured, deliberate, because the roof was not just broken wood. It was a fragile bridge between survival and despair. He leaned closer to Atlas, feeling the dog's fur slick against his sleeve, a warm reassurance in the midst of the cold storm. The bucket operator called down to Briggs. "Position is steady. You are clear for the approach." Ryan nodded, though Briggs was out of earshot. The dog's eyes flicked back toward the attic seam, amber focused on a glow only he could perceive. Ryan lowered the microphone probe again, and this time the voice came more clearly. "Here." Emily's whisper echoed through the hollow spaces, thin but unmistakable. The sound vibrated through Ryan's chest, a pulse reminding him why he was here. Atlas stiffened, leaned slightly forward, and gave a soft bark of acknowledgement, as if he were the keeper of that fragile life, the first line of defense between her and the uncertainty of the fallen roof. Ryan breathed in the scent of wet insulation and old plaster dust, then exhaled slowly, letting his body match the rhythm of Atlas. "We have you," he murmured into the microphone, voice soft and even deliberate. "Help is on the way. Stay calm. You are safe." The dog pressed his nose against the seam, his weight shifting slightly, communicating urgency without panic. The bucket creaked higher, the line taut, moving them over the edge of the collapsed section. Below, a narrow access point was being cleared, stabilized by fire crews with saws and braces, the metal supports groaning under the rain and pressure. Ryan looked at Atlas, amber eyes reflecting in the puddled water on the roof, and whispered, "Guide me." The dog tapped the roof twice, paw precise, a signal he had learned to give in training, an alert to Ryan of where to focus. The rain fell harder, bouncing off the remaining shingles, forming rivulets that ran toward the gutterless edge. Ryan adjusted, leaning into the harness, following Atlas's lead across the slick surface, toward the opening where warmth and faint breath waited. Every inch counted. Every movement required trust and clarity. The storm provided cover, yes, but it also demanded respect. Atlas stopped again, ears pricked, nose twitching, then pressed his chest against the seam, letting Ryan know they were over the exact location. Ryan crouched, pressing one hand to the dog's back for guidance and balance, letting Atlas's instinct direct his own steps. The thermal image from below showed a small area of warmth, growing slightly as the stabilizing supports were set. Ryan could hear Emily breathing more clearly now, small, measured inhales that reflected the rhythm of Atlas's steady stance. A low groan came from the house as another wet beam settled. Ryan adjusted, shifting weight slowly, never breaking connection with Atlas. "Hold it," he whispered. The dog huffed, the sound vibrating into Ryan's palm, and then settled. Together, they waited, poised on the edge of uncertainty, ready to act the moment the access point was secure. Down below, a stretcher team in waterproof gear prepared, braces in place. Every hand moved deliberately, guided by the faint heat signature and the signals from Atlas above. Rain fell around them, heavy, yet a strange clarity cut through the sound, a sense of rhythm and timing that only comes when life hangs delicately in balance, and every movement is deliberate, measured, precise. Ryan exhaled, letting his weight relax fractionally, knowing that in every paw tap, every shift of Atlas's stance, and in the steady hum of rain and wind, they were all connected. Life waited beneath the beams, fragile and precious, and Ryan, Atlas, and the rescue crew were poised to deliver it safely into the world. Ryan adjusted the harness one last time, feeling the wet straps pressing against his shoulders, the cold rain dripping along the seams of his jacket. Atlas remained steady beside him, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the narrow opening beneath the collapsed roof. The sound of water running through the gutters mixed with the soft hiss of saw blades and the occasional click of metal braces setting into place. Each sound seemed magnified, resonating through Ryan's chest and echoing off the wet walls of the house. He leaned slightly toward Atlas, palm resting gently along the dog's spine, feeling the tension in the animal's frame, the precise control that had been honed through months of training and the bond of trust that only comes from years of partnership. Below, the rescue team moved slowly, placing stabilizing beams in the most precarious sections of the attic floor, the glow from their headlamps reflecting off the water-streaked walls. Emily's faint voice reached Ryan again, more certain this time, a soft whisper that carried through the cavity. "I am here. I am here." The words made the rain feel colder against his face, sharper against his cheek, and yet a warmth settled in his chest. Atlas shifted slightly, nose lowering toward the seam, ears twitching, tail still, signaling that he had confirmed her presence and understood the path forward. Ryan took a measured breath, feeling the rain soak through his hair, cool and relentless, and began inching toward the edge of the roof where the collapsed section had left a narrow gap. Every footstep was deliberate, measured, aware of the shifting weight beneath him. Atlas mirrored him perfectly, paw careful, movements deliberate, watching Ryan as much as the opening below. A fire crew member below called out, "Be ready with the sling. Ready to secure her the moment she is accessible." Ryan nodded, not taking his eyes off Atlas or the opening where warmth flickered through the darkness. He reached the edge and crouched, extending a hand down toward the gap. Atlas leaned in, chest almost touching the roof, nose pointing to the corner where the light from the thermal probe shone faintly. "This way," Ryan whispered. The dog tapped the roof twice, signaling the precise spot. Ryan secured the rope to his harness, eyes scanning the makeshift support beams, judging which would hold his weight as he lowered himself just enough to reach the small opening. Atlas watched him, body tense but steady, letting Ryan lead, guiding him silently with subtle shifts of weight and small nudges from the muzzle against Ryan's arm. The rescue team below adjusted the supports, lifting a narrow board to allow safe passage, careful not to collapse the small area that had held Emily. Ryan leaned carefully into the gap, hand extended, fingertips brushing the warmth that came from inside. Atlas pressed closer to Ryan, providing balance, reassurance, and silent coordination. The dog's presence gave him focus, a rhythm that matched the rain and wind, a heartbeat against the chaos of broken wood and debris. Emily's voice whispered again, clearer, "Atlas? Are you there?" The dog pressed his nose through the small opening, letting out a soft huff that vibrated through Ryan's hand. Ryan replied, "Yes, we are here. You are safe. Atlas has found you." The moment stretched, the rain and storm falling away in concentration, until Ryan could carefully lift Emily into his arms through the small space, the harness supporting him, Atlas steady at the edge. Her small weight against him, wet and cold, yet alive, made his chest tighten with relief. He adjusted the rope and carefully moved back toward the bucket, Atlas stepping alongside with deliberate movements, guiding them to safety. Every inch taken was a combination of training, trust, and instinct. The dog's eyes remained focused, amber and clear, reflecting understanding beyond any human words. The bucket rose slowly, Ryan supporting Emily securely, Atlas following the motion, standing guard on the roofline until they were both safe inside the protective frame of the lift. The rain washed over them, relentless and steady, but the moment was quiet. The storm was no longer an enemy but a backdrop to the courage, trust, and the quiet miracle that had taken place above the collapsed roof. Ryan breathed deeply, feeling the wet air fill his lungs, Atlas leaning into his side, and for the first time, the morning seemed less gray, the rain less harsh, the warmth of life and loyalty prevailing over every fear and shadow that had preceded this rescue. The bucket descended with a slow mechanical hum, carrying Ryan, Emily, and Atlas through the rain toward the waiting lights below. No one cheered at first. The yard remained quiet, as if every person there was afraid that too much sound might break the fragile miracle they had just witnessed. Emily lay wrapped in Ryan's arms beneath a silver thermal blanket, her face pale from cold, her dark blonde hair damp against her cheeks, but her eyes were open. That was what mattered. Open, frightened, alive. Atlas stood pressed against Ryan's leg inside the lift, refusing to sit, refusing to look away from the girl. His sable fur was soaked flat along his ribs. His torn red collar hung crooked at his neck. His paws trembled from exhaustion, but his gaze stayed fixed on Emily with the devotion of a sentry who had completed his watch and still did not trust the dawn to keep its promise. When the bucket reached the ground, The paramedics moved in with practiced gentleness. Ryan stepped carefully onto the wet grass and transferred Emily onto the stretcher, keeping one hand near her shoulder until the medical team had her secure. She blinked against the rain and turned her head weakly. "Atlas," she whispered. The dog pushed forward before anyone could stop him, placing his nose against the edge of the blanket. One paramedic started to guide him back, but Captain Briggs lifted a hand. "Let him." Atlas touched Emily's fingers with the softest pressure, barely more than breath. Her hand moved, slow and shaking, and settled between his ears. The dog closed his eyes. Ryan looked away for a moment, not because he was embarrassed by emotion, but because some moments deserve privacy even when they happen in front of a whole street. Behind the tape, the neighbors stood silent. Some held umbrellas. Some held hands. The older woman in the blue raincoat covered her mouth and cried without making a sound. A sheriff's deputy spoke quietly into his radio, his voice lowered as though he had stepped into a chapel. The rain softened again, thinning into mist, and the gray sky above Briar Glen seemed to loosen by one small shade. Emily's parents arrived moments later in a White County truck, tires sliding on the wet road as it stopped behind the fire engine. Her mother, Claire Miller, stepped out before the vehicle had fully settled, a fair-skinned woman in her early 40s with rain already gathering in her auburn hair. Her father, Thomas, followed with the stunned, hollow look of a man who had been told the worst might be true and had driven toward it anyway. A firefighter caught them before they reached the stretcher, speaking quickly and softly, but Claire saw Emily's face beneath the blanket and almost folded where she stood. Thomas wrapped one arm around her shoulders. Together, they moved forward, slow at first, then with the desperate care of people afraid to wake from a dream. "Baby," Claire breathed. Emily's eyes filled, but she managed the smallest smile. "I went back for Atlas." Her mother touched her cheek with both hands, careful, trembling. I know, sweetheart." Thomas knelt beside the stretcher, rain running off his baseball cap. He looked at Atlas, then at Ryan. For a long moment, he could not speak. His eyes moved to the dog's collar, to the faded working letters, to the mud on Ryan's sleeves, to the ruined house behind them. "He stayed with her," Thomas finally said. His voice broke on the last word, not loudly, just enough to reveal the weight inside it. Ryan nodded. "He did more than stay. He led us to her." Captain Briggs stepped closer, holding the thermal camera against his chest. His face was tired, rain-lined, humbled. "If that dog had come down when we called him, we would have treated this as a structural clearance and waited longer for the engineer." He kept pointing. He kept alerting. He bought her time. Emily's hand tightened faintly in Atlas's fur. The dog leaned into her touch, his body finally beginning to sag from fatigue. Ryan crouched beside him and saw the small details he had missed before. The scraped nails from holding the slick roof. The shallow shivers beneath the wet coat. The stubborn lift of his ears, as though even exhaustion could not silence duty. "You are done now," Ryan said softly. "Stand down, Atlas." The phrase seemed to pass through the dog like memory. His ears relaxed. His head lowered. He let out one long breath and sat in the mud beside the stretcher, still touching Emily's hand with his shoulder. A paramedic checked him quickly, speaking in the warm, calm tone used for children and working animals. "Cold, tired, but steady," she said. "We should get him warmed up too." Claire looked at Ryan, then at Briggs. "He rides with her." No one argued. Not the paramedics. Not the fire captain. Not even the rain. They lifted Emily into the ambulance, and Atlas stepped up the ramp after her, slow but determined, as if the vehicle were simply another post he had been assigned to guard. Before the doors closed, Emily looked past her parents and found Ryan standing in the yard, rain dripping from his scarred nose and field jacket. "Thank you," she whispered. Ryan placed one hand over his chest in a quiet Marine gesture. Not a salute exactly, something smaller, more human. "Thank him," he said, nodding toward Atlas. The dog looked back once from inside the ambulance, amber eyes catching the red flash of emergency lights. In that look, Ryan saw something older than training and deeper than instinct. A promise kept, a story told without words. Then the doors closed, the siren stayed silent, and the ambulance rolled away through the mist, carrying a girl, a dog, and a miracle that had begun on a broken roof. By the time the ambulance disappeared around the bend on Hawthorne Road, The rain had become a fine silver mist, soft enough to make the ruined house look less broken from a distance. But up close, nothing was gentle. The front porch sagged like an old man's shoulders. Pink insulation hung from the upper wall in damp strips. Family photographs lay under a cracked pane of glass near the flower beds, their colors blurred by water. Ryan stood beside Captain Briggs while the fire crew finished securing the perimeter, and neither man said anything for a while. Some rescues ended with noise, applause, handshakes, cameras, the bright relief of a crowd finally allowed to breathe. This one ended with mud on boots, steam rising from wet jackets, and the strange holy silence that follows when death has come close, but not close enough. Briggs removed his helmet and rubbed one hand across his face. "I have been doing this 28 years, he said at last. Never saw a dog mark a void like that from above. Ryan watched the road where the ambulance had gone. Maybe he was not marking a void. Briggs looked at him. Ryan's voice stayed low. Maybe he was guarding a promise. The captain did not answer, but his eyes shifted toward the house, toward the torn shingles where Atlas had stood in the rain for hours, refusing food, warmth, and safety because a girl beneath the roof had whispered his name. A deputy approached with a soaked clipboard and asked Ryan for a statement. Ryan gave it. Plainly, no embellishment, no mention of miracles. He described the dog's posture, the paw signals, the thermal reading, the voice through the microphone, the coordinated extraction. He used practical words because official pages do not know what to do with grace. Still, when he finished, the deputy paused over the final line, pen hovering. Anything else? Ryan looked at the roof. The broken seam still stared back, dark and narrow. Right that the dog stayed, he said. That matters. The deputy nodded and wrote it down. Across the yard, Claire and Thomas Miller had left in their truck to follow the ambulance, but Thomas had pressed something into Ryan's hand before leaving. At first, Ryan had not looked. Now he opened his palm. It was a small metal tag, old and scratched, attached to a piece of faded black cord. Caleb Miller, United States Marine Corps. The letters were worn soft around the edges. Thomas had said only one sentence when he gave it to him. Caleb trained him to come home. Ryan closed his fingers around the tag, feeling the cold metal against his skin. He understood then why Atlas had not behaved like a family pet that morning. He understood the taps, the refusal, the discipline beneath the desperation. The dog had been trained by a Marine who was no longer there to give the command. And still, somehow, the lesson had remained. Come home. Bring them home. Leave no one behind. Ryan felt an old ache stir behind his ribs, the kind he carried quietly and rarely named. Years earlier, overseas, another dog had stood between him and a mistake he never would have lived long enough to regret. Her name had been Mercy, a lean black and tan shepherd with one white toe and a habit of leaning her shoulder into his knee whenever he pretended he was fine. She had been gone for 6 years now, but some mornings Ryan still woke expecting to hear her paws at the foot of his bed. That was the trouble with loyal souls. They did not leave all at once. They stayed in habits, in empty corners, in the way a man stops before crossing a threshold because some part of him is still waiting for a dog to go first. Briggs noticed the tag in Ryan's hand, but did not ask about it. Instead, he nodded toward the road. Hospital is 7 miles east. Briar Glen Memorial. They will probably want to talk to you. Ryan almost said no. He had done what he could. The family had each other. Atlas had his girl. That should have been enough. But then he remembered the way Emily had whispered, "Please do not take him away." He remembered the way Atlas had looked back before the ambulance doors closed, not finished with the world, not finished with his watch. Ryan tucked Caleb's tag safely into his jacket pocket. I will go. At Briar Glen Memorial, the emergency entrance glowed warm against the gray morning. Rainwater streamed off the awning in steady threads. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant, coffee, and wet clothes, the universal scent of worried families waiting for good news. Ryan signed in at the desk, leaving muddy prints he tried and failed to avoid. A nurse with silver glasses pointed him toward a quiet treatment room at the end of the hall. He heard Atlas before he saw him. Not barking, just one soft, restless huff. Ryan stepped into the doorway and found the shepherd lying on a blanket beside Emily's bed, wrapped in a hospital towel that made him look smaller than he had on the roof. Emily was propped against white pillows, a warm blanket tucked under her chin, a small bandage on her forehead, her parents seated close on either side. Her color had returned slightly. Her eyes were tired, but clear. Atlas lifted his head when Ryan entered. His tail moved once against the floor. Emily smiled. "He waited for you too," she said. Ryan stepped inside, suddenly aware of the tag in his pocket and the dampness still clinging to his jacket. "I think he has been waiting for a lot of people," he said. Thomas stood and shook Ryan's hand with both of his. No speech came. None was needed. Claire wiped her eyes and looked down at Atlas. "They said he should rest, but he will not sleep unless she keeps one hand on him." Emily's fingers rested in the shepherd's fur. Caleb used to say Atlas listened with his whole heart. Ryan lowered himself into the chair near the foot of the bed. Outside the narrow window, the clouds were beginning to break, letting a thin blade of sunlight touch the hospital brick. He took Caleb's tag from his pocket and held it out gently. "Your father asked me to keep this safe for the ride over." Emily stared at it for a long second. Then her lips trembled. Atlas lifted his head, nose reaching toward the tag, and touched it with the quiet reverence of recognition. The room fell still. In that silence, no one needed to explain what had happened on the roof. A brother's training, a dog's memory, a marine's trust, a girl's small voice under broken wood. All of it had met in the rain, exactly where it had to. Ryan placed the tag beside Emily's hand. Atlas rested his chin over it, and finally closed his eyes. Emily slept for nearly an hour with one hand resting on Atlas's shoulder and Caleb's tag tucked beneath her fingers. No one in the room moved more than they had to. Claire sat beside the bed, watching her daughter breathe with the careful awe of a mother who had almost been forced to imagine a world without that sound. Thomas stood by the window with his arms folded across his chest, looking out at the hospital parking lot where rainwater gathered in shining pools beneath the morning light. Ryan remained in the chair near the foot of the bed, still wearing his damp field jacket, his hands clasped loosely, his posture straight even in exhaustion. He had meant to stay only a few minutes. He had meant to leave once the doctors said Emily was stable and Atlas was warm. But the room held him there, not by request, not by obligation, but by something quieter, a sense that the story had not finished speaking. Atlas finally stirred when a nurse entered with a bowl of water and a folded blanket. The shepherd lifted his head, blinked once, then looked immediately to Emily. Only after confirming her hand was still there did he lower his muzzle toward the bowl. He drank slowly, each swallow steady and tired. The nurse smiled without showing her teeth, the way people smile around sacred things. "He is more disciplined than most patients," she whispered. Emily's eyes opened halfway. "He was Caleb's best student," she murmured. Her voice was still weak, but clearer now, softened by sleep. Ryan leaned forward slightly. "Caleb trained him for search work." Thomas turned from the window. For the first time since the rescue, his face carried something beyond shock. Memory, painful but proud. Caleb volunteered with County Search and Rescue before he enlisted. Atlas was supposed to be a family dog. That lasted about 2 weeks. Caleb saw how fast he learned, how he listened. Pretty soon, those two were working drills in the backyard with laundry baskets, old blankets, flashlights, anything they could use. Claire gave a faint laugh through her tears. "They used to hide my oven mitts and call it scent training." Emily smiled at the ceiling. "Mom hated that. I hated finding one in the garage freezer," Claire said softly. The room warmed around the small memory. Even Atlas seemed to feel it. His ears relaxed, and his tail moved once beneath the towel. Thomas reached into his wallet and pulled out a creased photograph, worn white at one corner. He handed it to Ryan. In the picture, Caleb Miller stood in the Miller backyard on a sunny afternoon, fair-skinned and broad-shouldered in a plain gray United States Marine Corps shirt, one arm around a younger Emily and the other hand resting on Atlas's head. Caleb's smile was bright, but Atlas was serious, staring at the camera as if he already understood that joy was something worth guarding. Ryan studied the photograph longer than he intended. "He had kind eyes," Ryan said. Thomas nodded once, swallowing hard. "He did." Emily turned her head toward Ryan. After Caleb was gone, Atlas stopped sleeping in his bed. "He slept outside my door every night. I thought he was lonely. Maybe he was. But maybe he was still on duty." Ryan looked down at the dog. Atlas had placed one paw beside the hospital bed wheel, as if anchoring himself there. "Duty can become love when it lasts long enough," Ryan said. Emily watched him carefully. You talk like you know. The question was gentle, but it found its mark. Ryan breathed in, catching the faint smell of rain drying in cotton, antiseptic, and warm dog fur. I had a dog named Mercy, he said. She worked with me during my last deployment. She had a way of knowing when I was about to make a bad decision before I knew it myself. Atlas lifted his eyes at the sound of the name, alert but calm. She brought me home, Ryan continued. Not all at once. Some days, she only got me from 1 hour to the next. But that counts. Claire looked at him with quiet understanding. Where is she now? Ryan's gaze dropped to his hands. Resting. No one pressed further. The word was enough. Outside the window, clouds broke apart over Briar Glen, and sunlight spilled across the wet parking lot, bright enough to turn every puddle into a small piece of sky. A doctor came in then, kind-faced and deliberate, and explained that Emily would recover with rest, observation, and time. No grand speeches. No dramatic warnings. Just careful instructions and the relief of ordinary medical language. Stable. Warm. Responsive. Safe. Those words moved through the room like a hymn. Thomas bowed his head. Claire kissed Emily's forehead. Atlas released a long sigh and finally allowed his chin to sink onto the blanket. But just as the room began to settle, a knock sounded at the door. Captain Briggs stood in the hallway, clean helmet under one arm, his turnout coat streaked with mud and sawdust. Beside him was Deputy Harris, holding a sealed plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small, water-damaged notebook with a faded blue cover. Briggs looked at the Millers first, then at Ryan. We found this in the attic void while finishing the safety sweep, he said. It was inside a metal lunchbox near where Emily was trapped. It looks like Caleb's handwriting. Emily's face changed. Her fingers tightened in Atlas's fur. Thomas stepped forward slowly and took the bag as if it held something fragile enough to vanish. Through the plastic, Ryan could see the first page, wrinkled but readable. At the top, in firm block letters, Caleb had written, Atlas commands and emergency signals. Beneath it were neat lines, numbered, practiced, patient. 3 paw taps means live scent confirmed. Refusal to leave means stay and alert until relieved. Ryan felt the air leave his lungs. Briggs removed his cap. Claire covered her mouth. Emily stared at the page, tears sliding silently toward her hairline. Atlas lifted his head, looked at the notebook, then at Emily, and gave one soft huff, almost proud, almost sad. The story inside that lunchbox had not been a secret treasure. It was something better. It was a brother's unfinished lesson, left behind in pencil and rain, waiting for the day his dog would remember it well enough to save the sister he loved. By late afternoon, Briar Glen Memorial had grown quiet in the way small hospitals do after the first storm of fear has passed. The hallways still hummed with soft footsteps and rolling carts, but inside Emily's room, time seemed to slow around the steady rhythm of her breathing and the gentle rise and fall of Atlas sleeping beside her bed. The blue notebook lay open on the tray table, protected now beneath a clear sleeve, its pages dried carefully by a nurse who understood without asking that some papers are more than paper. Caleb's handwriting filled the lines with patient certainty. Stay means hold position. 2 taps means uncertain scent. 3 taps means confirmed life. Refusal means do not remove until relieved by handler. Ryan read those words more than once, and each time they felt less like instructions and more like a voice crossing distance. Caleb had not known the roof would fall. He had not known the rain would come so hard, or that his sister would be trapped under the one room where his old training notes were stored. He had only loved a dog well enough to teach him purpose, and loved his family well enough for that purpose to outlive him. That was the quiet miracle no one could put in a report. Not the dramatic kind people talk about loudly. The kind that hides inside daily patience, repeated commands, backyard drills, muddy paws, and a young Marine kneeling in grass beside a German shepherd, teaching him that every living soul deserves to be found. Captain Briggs stood near the doorway, holding his helmet with both hands. He had come to say goodbye, but like Ryan, he had not been able to leave quickly. His eyes remained on the notebook. We are adding those signals to our K-9 coordination briefing, he said. Not as policy yet, just awareness. A dog trying to stay may not be disobedient. He may be telling us something. Thomas Miller nodded, his hand resting on the back of Emily's bed rail. Caleb would have liked that. Claire smiled through tired eyes. He would have pretended not to. Then he would have talked about it for 3 hours. A small laugh moved through the room, light and brief, but real. Emily reached down, fingers finding Atlas's ear. The shepherd stirred, opened one amber eye, then closed it again when he felt her touch. Ryan watched them and felt something inside him loosen, not vanish, not heal completely, but loosen enough for breath to move through it. For years, he had thought loyalty was measured by how long someone could stand guard. Today, he understood it another way. Sometimes loyalty means staying until someone else can carry the weight. Sometimes it means trusting another pair of hands when yours are too tired. He looked at Atlas, wrapped in a clean blanket, one paw still angled toward Emily's bed as if he had built an invisible line no fear could cross. He needs rest, Ryan said softly. Emily nodded. He will sleep when I sleep. That sounds like a Marine, Ryan said. Thomas looked at him. Would you come by when the house is rebuilt? The question seemed simple, but it carried more beneath it. Not just gratitude. An invitation. A way of saying that people who meet inside a miracle do not always walk away as strangers. Ryan glanced toward the window. The sky had cleared almost completely, leaving a pale gold light over the parking lot. I would be honored. Claire reached for the blue notebook and touched the corner of the sleeve. We want copies made. For the fire department. For search and rescue. Maybe even for the county training program. Briggs nodded immediately. I can help with that. Emily looked down at Atlas. Then Caleb still gets to teach. No one answered for a moment, because the truth of it was too tender to touch too quickly. Outside, a church bell rang somewhere in town, for slow notes carried through damp air. Ryan rose from his chair and felt the stiffness in his knees, the pull of fatigue in his shoulders. He had been awake since before dawn, and yet he felt less tired than he had in months. Emily lifted Caleb's tag from the blanket and held it out to him. Can you keep this until we go home? Ryan shook his head gently. It belongs with you. No, she said, her voice quiet but firm. Caleb always said a tag is not about where it starts. It is about who carries the promise when it is needed. Ryan looked at the small, scratched metal in her palm. Atlas opened his eyes then, watching him with that same steady knowing he had shown from the roof. Ryan accepted the tag carefully and closed his hand around it. The metal was warm now from Emily's fingers. Then I will carry it until you ask for it back. Emily smiled, exhausted but peaceful. Atlas will remind you. I believe he will. Ryan stepped toward the door, then stopped and looked back. Claire was brushing Emily's hair away from her face. Thomas was folding the hospital blanket more neatly around Atlas. Captain Briggs was studying the notebook like it had given him a new language. And Atlas, the dog who had refused to leave a broken roof, rested at last beneath the soft light of a hospital room. His mission complete, but his love still awake. Ryan walked outside into the washed, clean evening. The air smelled of wet pavement, cut grass, and the faint sweetness that comes after a hard rain. Across the road, a flag in front of the hospital moved gently in the breeze. Ryan stood beneath it for a long moment, Caleb's tag in his pocket, Mercy's memory at his back, Atlas's courage still bright in his mind. Some rescues do not end when the stretcher rolls away. Some keep moving, person to person, lesson to lesson, until a whole town learns to listen more carefully to what love is trying to say. That evening, Briar Glen did not remember only the house that fell. It remembered the dog who stayed, the girl who answered, the brother whose words remained, and the Marine who understood that sometimes God sends the help we need on 4 tired paws, standing in the rain, refusing to leave until every life is brought home.